Some PlayStation 1 RPGs are tied to their time. They were great when they launched, but rough to go back to now. But others, they still hold up today not just because of nostalgia, but because the design, pacing, and ideas behind them were strong enough to last. Today, we're taking a look at 10 RPGs for the PS1 that are still amazing, even in 2025. Whether you're revisiting them or discovering them for the first time, they're absolutely worth your time. Let's get into it. Chrono Cross was already one of the most ambitious RPGs on the PS1, and even in 2025, Chrono Cross shows just how much it was doing right. Part of that comes from how it lets you build a wide cast of characters across parallel worlds, and a battle system that still stands out as one of the more unique designs from that era. Instead of a standard MP bar, you work with a stamina-based system that builds elemental energy as you attack, and that energy feeds directly into a broader field effect mechanic. And if you're paying attention to the flow of battle, you can stack certain elements to strengthen your own magic or disrupt the enemy's setup before they even have a chance to take advantage of it. Typically in JRPGs, party members are just added as the story moves along. But here, you actually have to recruit them, and depending on the choices you make, the team you build can end up looking very different. Some characters join through side quests, while others only appear if you commit to a specific path and give up other options entirely. It gives each playthrough its own shape, and there's still a lot of debate over which combination of characters people liked best. Playing it today is a lot easier thanks to the updates included in the Radical Dreamers edition. The remaster adds small but helpful changes like faster battle speed, sharpened character models, and cleaner background art. And as the title already hints at, it also includes Radical Dreamers, a short text-based side story that fills in parts of the lore that the original game only hinted at. Even though this isn't a full remake, the modern touches go a long way toward making it easy to experience the game, without needing old hardware or relying on emulators. Compared to its predecessor, Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross takes a very different approach, and it doesn't follow the straightforward structure most RPGs from that time used. Instead, it leans into unpredictability, letting you shape the experience through your choices without much direct guidance. It's still one of the most ambitious RPGs from that generation, and it holds up better than you might expect. Continuing with Parasite Eve, which opens more like a thriller than a traditional RPG. You find yourself in modern-day New York during a sudden and violent outbreak, and from the very beginning, the game sets a tone that feels a lot more grounded than similar games from the late 90s. Instead of traveling across a big world map filled with random encounters, you're moving through specific locations like museums, hospitals, and subway tunnels, where battles happen directly on the map. Combat blends turn-based actions with live movement, where you manage a timing bar for attacks while constantly shifting position to avoid enemy strikes. Different weapons also change how you approach combat. Some are better for quick repositioning, while others reward standing your ground and trading heavier hits. Customization plays a steady role in Parasite Eve. You can transfer stats or special traits between weapons and armor by using tools you find while exploring. And because inventory space is limited, you're constantly weighing what's worth keeping and what needs to be thrown out to make room. Leveling up isn't just about raising stats either. As you grow stronger, you unlock mitochondria powers that open up new options during fights, from healing abilities to offensive skills. And building out those powers becomes a major part of surviving tougher encounters later on. And it doesn't throw in puzzles or heavy resource hoarding the way most survival horror games do. The tension mostly comes from how you manage space and timing inside fights, and how well you've set up your gear before walking into new areas. Even now, it's a bit of an unusual mix compared to both RPGs and horror games of the time. It moves slower, puts more weight on positioning, and focuses heavily on short bursts of decision-making rather than grinding. That mix still holds up pretty well today, and it gives it a style that hasn't really been repeated since. Next up, we have Breath of Fire 4, which sticks closer to traditional JRPG structure than a lot of its peers from the same time, but it holds up because it gets the fundamentals right. You spend most of your time moving between towns, open fields, and story-driven dungeons, with turn-based combat that's simple on the surface, but opens up as you dig deeper into the systems. The core battle system builds around learning enemy skills through a feature called Mastery. You can train under different masters scattered around the world, each teaching your characters different stat focuses or abilities depending on who you pair them with. On top of that, some skills are learned just by watching enemies in battle, which gives a small incentive to stay alert, rather than just bashing through every encounter. It also introduced combo attacks, where chaining spells or abilities between party members can create stronger effects or entirely new results if timed right, adding another layer without making the fights feel overly complicated. The world design feels more deliberate than a lot of RPGs from the same era. Maps are tighter and focused, without endless empty fields, and the tone leans more towards the slower, melancholic storytelling rather than high-stakes theatrics. You get a constant sense of a bigger world in the background, but the game rarely pulls you out of the immediate moment to explain it. The hand-drawn sprites and detailed backgrounds also hold up surprisingly well, giving the game a storybook feel that manages to stay grounded. There hasn't been a full remake or modern update, but if you're coming into it today, it's still easy to appreciate how clean and straightforward the design is. Compared to many open-ended RPGs that came later, Breath of Fire 4 feels almost refreshing. It sticks to its path, tells its story carefully, and gives you a solid adventure that doesn't waste your time. Koudelka doesn't follow the typical role-playing game playbook at all. It leans more into survival horror, mixing exploration and tactical battles inside a single haunted location. You spend nearly the entire game inside a crumbling monastery, slowly uncovering its history while dealing with both supernatural threats and grounded survival problems. Movement and exploration feel closer to early Resident Evil games. You move through tight and fixed camera spaces, solve puzzles, and search for supplies, all while managing limited inventory space. When combat triggers, the game shifts into a grid-based system where positioning and movement become just as important as your attack choices. Battles move at a slower, more methodical pace than most RPGs of the time, and that pacing fits the heavier tone the game builds as you push deeper into the monastery. Progression is flexible but not heavily explained. You level up stats based on how you play, and you're free to mold characters into different roles without being locked into specific classes. Equipment wears down over time, healing items are limited, and every mistake you make in a fight can carry consequences for the next few hours. It's a shorter game when compared to similar ones of its time, but it feels tightly built around creating pressure without being unfair. Even though Koudelka eventually led into the Shadow Hearts series on the PS2, which took the same dark tone but expanded it into a larger RPG world, this game stands completely on its own. It's rough in spots, especially if you're used to faster role-playing systems, but the atmosphere, slower pacing, and grounded approach to storytelling make it something that still feels different today. If you come into it expecting survival horror with tactical elements layered on top, rather than a full traditional RPG, Koudelka still delivers a very specific mood and experience that not many games since have really tried to recreate. Lunar 2 Eternal Blue feels like a polished extension of what made the first game stand out, building on the original's strong character focus and steady pacing without trying to reinvent itself. Even in 2025, it holds up because of how clearly it sticks to a simple, effective vision. It's a classic turn-based RPG at its core, but where it really shines is in how the world and characters are layered into the story. You move from town to town across a fully 2D world, with exploration that's straightforward but made richer through constant character interactions and small side events that make places feel lived in. Combat is turn-based but adds light tactical movement. Your characters reposition automatically depending on their attacks and skills, so spacing and area of effect abilities actually matter without making fights drag. Progression is simple and clean. You level up normally through battles, but real character growth is tied to equipment upgrades you find through exploration, not constant grinding. Magic unlocks at a steady pace, and even basic attacks stay useful right up to the end. One thing that still stands out today is the presentation. Every town and dungeon has unique visual details. The animated cutscenes were rare at the time and gave the story more weight, and even the 90s era voice acting helps ground the emotional beats without feeling overdone. It's a character-driven role-playing game first, and the group you travel with gets constant dialogue and interactions that keep the momentum going even between major story moments. A remastered version is included in the Lunar Remastered Collection, with widescreen support, sharper visuals, and a few quality-of-life updates. It doesn't change the core of the game, but it makes it a lot easier to play today without losing what made it work in the first place. If you want an RPG that focuses more on sharp pacing and strong character work rather than overwhelming systems, Lunar 2 still makes a strong case for itself even now. Moving on to Vagrant Story, a game that doesn't fit neatly into most RPG categories even today. It's a one-character dungeon crawler built around crafting, positioning, and tactical decision-making, and it's one of the few PS1 games that still feels completely its own, without any major updates. You play as Ashley Riot, an agent investigating a conspiracy in a ruined city, and the entire game takes place inside interconnected environments that focus almost entirely on exploration and combat. There's no traditional party system. You manage everything yourself, from gear setup to battle planning. Fights happen in real time, but success comes from targeting specific body parts, chaining moves together based on timing, and swapping weapons to deal with different enemy resistances. Progression is driven almost entirely by the gear you craft and the skills you learn along the way. Weapons build affinities towards certain enemy types the more you use them, and managing your loadout becomes just as important as your positioning in fights. The systems run deep, but the game doesn't always explain them clearly, which can make the first few hours feel slow if you come in expecting something more traditional. Vagrant Story also leans heavily into atmosphere. The muted color palette, the cinematic camera angles, and the way conversations are staged all work together to build tension without needing constant cutscenes or narration. Even the soundtrack stays quiet for long stretches, letting the environment and pacing carry the mood. There's never been a direct sequel, and no real follow-up has tried to recreate what Vagrant Story was doing. It's slower, more methodical, and it rewards patience in a way very few games from that time do. If you're willing to meet it halfway, it still feels like one of the most deliberate and well-built RPG experiments from that generation. Suikoden is one of those games that didn't make a massive splash when it launched, but looking back from 2025, it's easy to see why it built such a loyal following. It's a traditional turn-based RPG at first glance, but the way it handles scale, pacing, and character building still feels distinct even today. You start small, following the story of a young noble caught in a political struggle, but the world quickly opens up as you're sent to gather the 108 Stars of Destiny, a group of characters who can join your growing rebellion. Not all of them are mandatory, and part of the fun comes from hunting down new recruits, piecing together your army, and watching your castle grow as more people join the cause. It's a mechanic that makes progression feel tangible, because the world physically changes based on how much effort you put into building your group. And combat is mostly straightforward. Regular battles are quick and party-based, with a focus on different character pairings, which creates stronger team attacks. Larger war battles and one-on-one duels are woven into the story as well, helping to break up the rhythm and keep the game feeling fresh. Battles move quickly, so you spend more time pushing the story forward rather than getting stuck in long, grinding loops. The sprite work holds up well, with locations that feel sharp and clean rather than cluttered, giving every area a sense of purpose without stretching things just to seem bigger. Even though the early hours focus on small, local struggles, the story eventually grows into something much larger without losing its tight pacing. There's now an official remaster of Suikoden 1 and 2, making it easier than ever to play today without needing to track down old hardware. Even without a full remake, Suikoden's structure feels just as strong now as it did back then. It's a rare RPG that builds a sense of community and momentum instead of relying purely on spectacle, and that's a big part of why it still holds up so well. The Legend of Dragoon might have been built to compete with the big names of its time, but it carved out its own space thanks to a strong identity and a focus on more active combat. Even today, it still stands out compared to a lot of the more passive turn-based RPGs that were common when it released. You follow Dart and his companions across a large fantasy world, but it's the way the battles demand your attention that gives Dragoon a different kind of energy than most RPGs from back then. Fights use a system called additions, where attacks are tied to timed button presses that extend combos. It gives even basic encounters a sense of momentum that a lot of traditional turn-based games didn't really have. Transforming into Dragoon form during tougher fights adds another layer, giving you access to magic attacks and heightened stats. But even then, you're still relying on your timing and rhythm to land your strongest moves. Character growth is straightforward but closely tied to how well you perform in battle. New additions unlock as you level up or master existing ones, and Dragoon abilities expand at a steady pace without overloading you with systems. Equipment upgrades stay simple too, keeping the focus on improving your timing and strategy instead of micromanaging stats. It can feel stiff early on, but as you get better at landing combos, the combat starts to flow much more naturally. The story follows familiar JRPG themes like Lost Kingdoms and Ancient Powers, but the overall tone leans heavier and more serious compared to the bright, adventurous feel of most RPGs from the same period. Pre-rendered backgrounds and a full animated intro help the world feel larger than it technically is. If you want a classic RPG that actually asks you to stay focused during every fight instead of just mashing attacks, The Legend of Dragoon still holds up as something worth playing. Persona 2 Eternal Punishment doesn't feel like a traditional JRPG, even by late 90s standards. It takes a grounded, urban approach instead of a fantasy world, and the slower, more deliberate pacing can feel unusual if you're coming in expecting something closer to later Persona games. You play as Maya, a reporter investigating a series of murders linked to rumors becoming real, literally. The game is set in a version of modern Japan where belief has power, and the plot leans heavily into psychological and supernatural themes instead of saving the world storylines. Exploration happens across familiar city streets, offices, and underground areas, and even in battles, persuasion and negotiation play a bigger role than brute force. You spend a lot of time talking with demons, negotiating to collect new powers instead of just fighting everything you meet. Combat uses a party-based system built around personas, which act like equipable skill sets. You assign personas to your characters, develop their abilities over time, and unlock fusion spells that trigger when specific party members cast certain combinations. Fights can feel dense early on, but once you settle into it, there's a real rhythm to building your team's options and manipulating enemies instead of always fighting head-on. Progression leans into customization rather than just level grinding, and because enemies often react differently based on negotiation choices or fusion spells, you're pushed to experiment a lot more than you would in a typical RPG. Eternal Punishment is technically the second half of the Persona 2 story, following after Innocent Sin, but it stands on its own well enough that you can still jump into it fresh. There hasn't been a full modern remake, but it's been re-released digitally, making it easier to access now without tracking down rare PS1 copies. If you're patient with the slower pacing, it still stands out as one of the most grounded, psychologically heavy RPGs from that time, and a major step toward the Persona style that would take over later. Final Fantasy IX might have been the last PlayStation Final Fantasy, but it feels like the series coming full circle. Where the previous games leaned harder into futuristic settings, 9 pulls back toward classic fantasy, and even today, it holds up because of how focused and cohesive it feels from start to finish. You follow Zidane and his group across a fractured world of kingdoms, airships, and hidden threats. Exploration is built around a traditional overworld, towns, and dungeons, but everything feels more condensed and purposeful compared to some of the bigger, looser RPGs from the time. Combat sticks to the classic active time battle system, but every character has a clear role, and the ability system ties progression directly into your equipment. Learn a skill from a weapon or armor piece, master it, and you keep it even after swapping gear, which makes gearing choices actually matter beyond just chasing raw stat boosts. The game also added the trance mechanic, where characters temporarily unlock stronger abilities after taking enough damage. You can't always control when it triggers, but it adds real tension to longer fights without feeling random or out of place. What still stands out is how much care went into the world building. Every town, every side character, even throwaway locations have a sense of history baked into them, and the art direction holds up surprisingly well even by today's standards. The music, as usual for Final Fantasy, does a lot of heavy lifting to pull the emotional beats together. 9 also moves at a tighter pace than Final Fantasy 7 or 8, keeping exploration and progression feeling brisk without losing the heart of the story. It's a sharp, focused game that still feels easy to return to even after all this time. The pacing, the structure, and the character work all come together in a way that still holds up today. And that's all I have for you today. Even after all these years, these PlayStation 1 RPGs still hold up better than they might should have. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe for more lists like this. And if there's a game you think deserves a spot on a list like this, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.